Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Man on the Rocks. It's the baby's biggest fan, Joe. Joining me, as always, the King, Atlas.
Hello, everybody.
This week, it's once again, we're in the middle of grinding season. We're talking about another tournament we went to. This time, it was the 2-day Cascade Clash event hosted by Aegis Gaming up in Bellingham, Washington. Got a doozy of a one. It is a crazy story that we had in a crazy event that Atlas and I experienced. Almost as crazy as these future events that we have. Also, I started doing a thing. All the events that we talk about in the future are going to be in the doobly-doo and in the show notes. So please, if you're in the area and curious about these shows and want to see us and play with us and all that stuff, that's where you'll find us in the events. But Atlas, what do we got coming up?
Okay. Just in brief, the next tournament that's coming up in the area is going to be on March 29th. There is going to be an event. It's a free-to-enter event at Comics the Gathering in Lakewood. They just got a new location and they're looking to start an actual CDH scene and some pretty consistent tournaments. So they're going to be doing that March 29th in the evening. It's a Friday, which is, like I said, free to enter, 100% proxy friendly. You should check it out if you're going to be in the area. It should be pretty low-key, but there'll be some raffles and things and I think maybe some store credit prizing. But just show up, let them know you're interested in supporting them and improving our scene. The next day, there is, on March 30th, there is CEDH 5, and that is going to be Issaquah, Washington, at the Laughing Dragon store. Another great event put on by the CEDH group. Really looking forward to playing in that. It should be a lot of fun. And then I think following that, there is an event on... of course, I'll be playing in Punt City on April 6th. So that'll be a fun experience for me, and I'm sure we'll have some stories to bring back to you then. But then the next event that I'm aware of after that, even though it's a little ways down the road, is going to be in May. It's the second weekend of May, which I believe is the 11th. So it's going to be Saturday the 11th, downtown Seattle. We'll have the store name for you next episode, but there is going to be another store starting a CDH scene on Saturday the 11th in downtown Seattle in the International District. And then, of course, on May 25th, which is 2 weeks after that, that'll be the next OCCS, which is our local store at Gabby's, which is going to be an awesome event that both Joe and I will be playing in, and there might be some more news coming for that one soon here, so stay tuned, we'll have some details for you.
Heck to the yeah. Speaking of details, we got the most important detail. This week's lucky patron, shout out to Orlioto. Appreciate you, my friend. You should come on down and get a drink with us. Cascade Clash, hosted by Aegis Games up in Bellingham, Washington. What an event, if I do say so myself. A very interesting structure. I guess I've just never done a tournament yet that has 2 days.
Yeah, it was really fun. It was the second one that I've done that had a 2-day structure. I thought it was run really well. It was a different structure than I'm used to, but I guess 2-day events just tend to be structured differently. So
I guess, and the way that the Swiss pairing ended up happening, I guess it's kind of reminiscent of how we do the events up at Gabby's, where after Swiss, the top 2 spots are seeded for the finals, and then the third place through 10th play for spots 3 and 4. Kind of just extrapolated a little bit further, wherein the top 12 were locked for semis, and then 13 through 28 fought for essentially the last 4 spots of semis, and then semis played, and then finals played. I thought it was an interesting structure. It was mildly frustrating at the beginning, just because of some weird proxy rules where proxies had to be official Magic Arts. When we'd asked the TO ahead of time, hey, what does the proxy rule mean? Because they were mentioning it was slightly different proxy rules. Where our initial understanding was they just didn't want any They just wanted the proxies to be family friendly, essentially, and be recognizable Magic cards. But when we got there, me and Tyler, we had to quickly swap a lot of our proxies around to either official arts or other lands, which was kind of frustrating.
Yeah, I think that was just like a miscommunication between like what the TO was like thought the policy was and like the owner or whatever. Because like you mentioned, we asked very specifically ahead of time to make sure that everyone was on board because they had advertised some stuff about their specific rules, and then when we tried to confirm with them, they were like, "Oh, it'll be fine. I wouldn't worry too much about it." And so there were some issues, and it wasn't just for us. There were a bunch of people who had some issues day of, but thankfully, I think everything ended up working out, at least like for the most part. There were a lot of people there who were able to lend out proxies with official art and stuff.
Yeah, and like thankfully the few proxies that I needed to use were all lands. I had every other card either an official or like good enough proxies. The big one for me was my Gaia's Cradle needed to be official. Which thankfully it was, so we got cleared on that. So it was literally just duels, and I have a set of regular, like real Magic cards that I swap into when we do our weekly events, for like my duels and stuff. So it was just a matter of just swapping the cards around and updating my Mox field that I submitted. It's just annoying because we also showed up to the event late because there was some really bad traffic on the freeway. It was just a nightmare of a morning start to the day.
A rough start, yeah.
Yeah, it was an intensely rough start. I was surprised that like my mental didn't like severely tank right at the beginning because of everything. Because we rushed right in. I'm like, okay, we're like 15 minutes late per the email they sent out like 2 days beforehand. Like we're just gonna have to just accept the round one loss and just move on. But thankfully, the TO and judging staff was very, very gracious and very, very accommodating for us because we weren't the only people that were showing up late, and we were actually able to play our round one. We just showed up in the nick of time.
Yeah, there were several cars that showed up late because, like you mentioned, huge accident.
Yeah, okay, so moving on to the event proper, I brought Baby Pod. Atlas, you brought Kinnan Turbo Stacks.
That is indeed what I brought. Actually, it was Trog Turbo Stacks.
Trog Turbo Stacks. Okay.
No, it was 5 Color Cheshire, the only deck that I play.
Only deck worth playing, if you ask me. How before we kind of go into like our round by round, how was your day one?
Terrible. It was so brutal. It was so awful. It was probably the worst performance I've had in a Swiss rounds in years. I don't think I've ever gone to the last round of Swiss without a win before, but that was my day one. Was 2 losses followed by 2 draws, and then my last round had to get a win and in to even see day 2, and so that's how that day went.
Yeah, I remember checking in with you throughout the day, and you were not having fun,
bro,
whatsoever.
Just demoralized left and right. I mean, my first round, can't even complain. I was absolutely ace, just like the perfect top deck, followed by like the perfect Adnaz from seat 1. I was seat 4. Just literally nothing you can do about that. Can't even be mad. It was super clean. I even had a Mystic Remora out, and just they fed me like probably between 20 and 30 cards before they even stuck a defense grid to defend their actual combo. And I just saw 0 interaction that I could cast. Like, no free spells. It was just clean and mad tough. Then my round 2 was like pretty. That one like put me on tilt because of some significant not even misplays, just objectively terrible decisions from one of the other players, and like to the point where it was almost like I don't think it wasn't intentionally throwing, but like to the point where it could have been like almost classified as collusion, like or like intentionally throwing or whatever, which I don't say
really.
Lightly. Yeah, like when someone has a when Kinnan has game-winning creatures on the board.
You were telling me about this one. Yeah.
Dude, there was a Kinnan player who had like an Exclamation and a Consecrated Sphinx on the board, and we were trying to interact with the Kinnan, and we made like me and the Sisei player at that pod both made our intentions known to this other player, and they just kept countering our stuff and stifling our Gilded Drakes, like literally just stopping anything we were trying to do to mess with this Kinnan player. They were just stopping it because the Kinnan player said, "Hey, I'll tap this Lauren that I cloned to let you draw a card if you stop them from like messing with my board," which like is not collusion. It was not. There was nothing nothing untoward was going on, but like at the same time, there's a point where you've got to be like, dude, There's
Dude,
a
is
level of game sense here that you just are not appreciating. I'm trying to explain it to you why this is such a terrible idea.
Like, is the one card you're getting really worth the entire game you're losing?
Yeah, and so that's basically what it boiled down to is like that game 2 was like it started off fine and it was relatively okay up until Kinnan just slammed those two like stuck those two like I had a turn 1 Draenith Magistrate against Tivit, Kinnan, and Sisay. Really strong
Solid start.
Yeah, and then I followed it with a turn 2 like it was turn 1 Draenith, turn 2 Rhystic Study, and just like controlling the board. It was a strong start. My Rhystic Study got popped, which is not even a problem. Like that's totally reasonable. But then just the Tivit player just kept jamming win after win after win attempt. When like we were telling like I was showing them counter spells. I'm like, I'm just going to stop you. Please don't go for this here. We're gonna lose to the Kinnan player when they untap, and they just kept shoving stuff, and we just kept like, and then we would try and mess with the Kinnan player, like I said, and just the Tivit player just kept jamming counterspell after counterspell to stop us. So
why?
That's a very good question that I don't think science will ever be able to answer. But but yeah, it was a brutal game that just wrecked my mental for like the next 2 rounds.
Yeah,
so I'm at 2 losses, and then I went into the next 2 games just absolutely on tilt.
Yeah, I met up with you at that point, and you were just not having any of it whatsoever. You were not in a good
I was
state.
not. I was like, yeah, I had to take a breath, like go outside and just rant to some other people that I knew at the tournament about how just like how that game was just so incredibly frustrating because it was nowhere close to, it was never supposed to be the Kinnan's game. They did of course end up winning for obvious reasons, but like we had the interaction to stop them, and we just another player defended that person's win, which was just incredibly frustrating. But so I was outside, I was on tilt, had to take a breather, came back in round 3. I was once again seeing red. I think I actually played relatively well. I met up with someone else from our team in that game, and they just like kept throwing counter spells my way, which worked out for them in the end, I guess, because they fought to a draw, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But frustrating again, going to round 4, still a draw. Like that game was also frustrating. Kinnan is my nightmare, and I hate that deck above everything now. Because it was another Kinnan player who everyone was like, honestly, it's fine they have 2 Rhystic Studies. Let's let their Hullbreaker Horror resolve without contesting it. Let's let this Tidespot Tyrant just sit on the battlefield.
Wait, sorry, the Kinnan player had 2 Rhystic Studies?
The Kinnan player resolved a card called Astral Dragon, which I have never seen.
Oh my god!
I haven't seen that card in a long time, like since I played Casual Magic. So they resolved Astral Dragon as a copy of someone else's Rhystic Study. So they made 2 copies. And then people were just feeding it. Like obviously, it's hard to pay for 2 Rhystic Studies. But
Yeah.
they were paying for the Niv Mizzet player's Rhystic Study, not paying for either of the Kinnan player's Rhystic Studies.
Oh, cool.
And then just like feeding Kinnan cards while they still have a Sylvan Library in play. And then the Kinnan slams a Hullbreaker Horror, just hard casts it. There's a Grafdigger's Cage and a Cursed Totem in play. So I guess people are like, oh, it's fine, but it's not fine. It's never fine. That deck loses to those cards, but not really.
Not really. They run Hullbreaker Horror and Tidespot Tyrant to deal with those cards.
And to win the game. And so they were like, the Kinnan player thankfully missed lethal. They played the Tidespot Tyrant and passed when they had infinite mana that they could have assembled. And then bounced the stacks pieces and then won the game. They missed it. They passed, or it was a Tidespot Tyrant first, and then passed. And then I was able to slam a Grand Abolisher, Gilded Drake the Tidespot Tyrant. I forgot the Tidespot Tyrant bounces lands, or I would have been able to finagle my way into the weirdest line of my life. If I could have generated 1 more white pip, which I would have been able to do if I reset my land and played it as my land for turn, because I hadn't done that yet. I forgot the card did that, so I missed my line where I could bounce everyone's permanents and just reset the game to a grind. Anyways, everything eats a Blasphemous Act from Niv Mizzet, so it's sort of a reset. And then the Kinnan plays Tidespot Tyrant or Hullbreaker Horror immediately following that, which is also just allowed to sit on the battlefield. Yeah, it was a very frustrating game as well.
What the fuck? What? Does no one just want to be like, yeah, the Kinnan's got everything?
I don't know.
That's cool. Give him more than everything. Why not?
When you're playing against the best deck in the format, and everyone's like, yeah, let's like mess with your board. You have missed 3 land drops and have 1 mana rock in play that you exiled. Like, it was something pretty impressive. Like, I exiled like an opposition agent to it or something, like my Chrome Mox, just to like be able to play the game. And people were like, honestly, like, you're the threat. Let's be messing with your stuff. Let's force willing your fantastical edition things.
They're correct though.
So that was yeah, right. Like it was just one of those days, man. Like I did an actual count, and I think outside of my commander and like interactive counter spells, like interactive spells, counter spells, removal spells, I resolved 12 things, like including mana blocks. I resolved 12 spells. Everything else got countered.
Jesus.
Absolutely crazy. And meanwhile, people are just over here with like Smothering Ties and Mystic Studies and Fishes and things, and they're just getting all their stuff fed, and no one gives a rat's patooey about it. And it was a very, very frustrating day. Go into round 5, last round of the day, and of course, this is my win and in. I have 2 draws. Technically speaking, if I win this game, I can make the bottom of the barrel for the cut for next day, because my tiebreakers are also just awful. So I can just scrape in there. So I play my last game, and of course we get seeded, and it's Temur Pirates, Kinnan, me, Kinnan. I was just like, are you kidding me? This is my nightmare.
That's so fucking rough.
It was my nightmare scenario. So Temur Pirates, thankfully they mull low. Have a rough start. Like they have like turn 2 Malcolm or something. That's kind of it. I kept the safest hand of my life. I said, all right, everyone's just been allowed to resolve everything today, and I've been allowed to resolve nothing. So I'm just not even going to try and keep a hand that resolves anything. I kept 3 lands, a Flusterstorm, a Mana Drain, a Swan Song, and a Worldly Tutor.
Holy hell. You were on the control plan.
I said, this Worldly Tutor is one of 2 things. It's either a Drannith Magistrate if no one's resolved their commander before my turn 2, or it's an Orcish Bowmasters. So it goes turn 1, Malcolm goes Land Rock Pass. Turn 2, Kinnan goes Land Orc Pass. I go Land Pass. And the 4th seat Kinnan goes Land Mana Crypt Trinisphere. And of course, the one thing that I cannot answer is an artifact on turn 1. It's an artifact or a creature. And so they slam this Trinisphere, and I just go, oh my god, we're going to lose the game. Because this Kinnan player was also playing at like a 90-degree angle to me, so I'd see every card in their hand. Like, they're not even trying to hide it. They're just kind of like sitting there, holding their hand, like, literally perpendicular to me. So I see that we're dead. Like, they have like an entire, like, they have turn 1 Trinisphere, followed by turn 2 Kinnan and another rock. For turn 3, they can just start spinning.
Holy shit!
No one else will be able to play the game because of this 3-ball. And I said, can anyone counter this? We're gonna lose the game. And the Temur's player said no. The other Kinnan player said, well, I mean, I could, but I can play the game through this. And I was like, I promise you, I do not think you can. If you're not the one slamming the 3-ball, and you have not even resolved your commander yet, I do not think that you will be able to win through this other Kinnan deck that will be just so far ahead of you. And was able to convince them.
Seems like logical thinking.
Yeah, I was able to talk them into force of negationing the 3-ball, thank God. And because otherwise that game is over on, like, even if the game hasn't ended, the game is over on turn 3. Like, we will have lost to this Kinnan player just because they'll have outvalued us to no end.
And just like mindless development, no stopping it
And
whatsoever.
like even if the other Kinnan player does manage to get their stuff online, the other Kinnan will still be at least 1 to 2 spins ahead of them. Plus mana advantage, so it was ridiculous. Anyways, that gets countered. Malcolm resolves their commander. The other Kinnan player resolves their commander. So I said, well, I guess this isn't going to be a Drannith Magistrate anymore, because that doesn't hose anything, like, aside from this 4th seat Kinnan, which I don't care about because their 3-ball plan just got stopped, and now they just have mana and Kinnan. So I Worldly Tutored for Orcish Bowmasters. Thankfully, the Malcolm player had played a fish, so I was able to abuse that to knock off one of the Kinnans, and then like some more dorks and things over the course of the game. And just hit my land drops, just drew a land off the top on turn 3, so I could have it for next turn. Just kind of curved out really nice and sustainably. And meanwhile the Kinnans are just doing the Kinnan thing where they're just making mana and getting ready to start activating.
Just doing it.
Yeah, finally I was able to, because OBM made the token, and one of the land I top decked on 3 was a Cradle. I played it on 4, which meant that I could play Kenrith, but I opted to hold up Mana Drain instead, which I guess was the correct play, because the 2nd seat Kinnan tries to force a Seaborn Muse. and
Snap mana drain.
yeah, I mana drained it. They let it go. It goes through. I get a 1 mana Kenrith on my turn, and I pass. And like the stuff just like we just kind of like go around and like nothing's really happening. No one's resolving any super impactful spells. I exiled a what's that thing called? The Perplexing Chimera.
Yep.
I offered a trade on one of the Kinnan players by swordsing it. I was like, hey, look, you can. One of the Kinnan players had copied my Bowmasters after my Kenrith had landed, and I was like, if you try and kill my Bowmasters here because you're scared of it killing your stuff, I'm killing your Bowmasters, and your Bowmasters is not going to be able to kill mine because of Kenrith. And they're like, okay, you're right. And so this other Kinnan player was feeling ganged up on, so I tried to swords their Chimera, and I was like, look, you can remove either one of the Bowmasters. It doesn't even matter to me. And they were like, no, I don't want to give you the Chimera, which, to be fair, is probably smart. So the Chimera just got exiled, which made my life as a control player a lot easier. So I was able to just sort of...
Card's so annoying.
Yeah, and then I get to my turn and I top decked a Necromancy, so I Necromancied the Seaborn Muse at main phase. No one else has any interaction at this point, at least not they're willing to like represent or use in any regard. So I Necromancy the Seaborn Muse for free, pass. I have a Gaia's Cradle, so I'm just like making a bunch of mana. One of the Seat 4 Kinnan player flips a what is it? The Void Winnower, the Can't Even card.
Can't Even.
Just kind of like locks the other two players out of the game. I still have a bunch of odd-costed spells in my hand. Like I have an Intuition, I have a Vampiric Tutor. So I Vamp Tutor for Touch the Spirit Realm in case that Void Winnower needs to leave the battlefield. The C4 Kinnan player tried to win the game with like a Moonsilver Key into Basalt Monolith combo, which one of the other players had a counterspell for if the Void Winnower left, so I touched up the Void Winnower. They countered it with like the Malcolm player countered it with a Pact of Negation.
Ooh, clutch.
Yeah, and then I overloaded a Cyclonic Rift in response to some other like game-ending play that Kinnan players tried to do in the same turn. They had to redevelop, and then they end their turn. The Void Winnower phases back in. The C2 Kinnan and the Malcolm are still locked out. Malcolm from their Pact, and Kinnan because of the Void Winnower, and it gets back around to me, and I was able to just like Intuition for like a Snap, an Eternal Witness, and something else. I don't even remember exactly what it was. I think it was some other card that won me the game. Anyways, it was just like 3 cards that won me the game in different manners, and they gave me one of them, and I was able to win the game. And so I clutched up and made it into the...
We got to day 2!
Thank God.
Let's go!
I know. Your day 1 was a lot better, though.
My day 1 was... So... It was good insofar as my record. I went 2-2-1. Was able to ID my round 5 and lock into 10th place at a Swiss, which felt very, very good. It was kind of an up and down day, if I'm being honest. So my round 1, I was up against a Omnixilus, a Tivit, myself, and then a second Tivit. I want to talk about the conclusions and observations kind of once we finish talking about Swiss. And my first 2 rounds really set the pattern for the rest of my Swiss experience. Round 1, I kept a decent hand, nothing really crazy. I essentially had game in hand if I ever got to 3 mana, and I just didn't get to 3 mana. I kept like a Worldly Tutor and a Bowmasters and 2 land, and the dockside count was just ridiculously high, and I had an Eldritch Evolution hand. If I ever got to 3 mana and got to untap, I was winning the game, no questions asked. I was so underdeveloped. Everyone was able to do whatever they want. Everyone was fighting each other. We ended up just getting Thoracled just at the correct time, which is really, really maddening. I don't know. There's something about Thoracle. It just seeing it across the battlefield and losing.
Always have it.
They just always have it. And there was just nothing really I could have done. I think I would have kept that hand again. My draws were just unfortunate. Because it was a really good hand. I think I played that table as best as I possibly could. It's just I didn't have my answers for Thoracle in hand and can't really do much for that when you have no interaction in hand and you're like, well, I'm just waiting on this land to win the game, really.
Yeah, Bowmasters does not stop Thoracle 90% of the time.
It really doesn't. And there was just no way I could have like finagled my stuff into any sort of like decent position. I was trying to talk the table into like, hey, we need to like keep open interaction, blah blah blah, this, that, and the other, and like no one really wanted to listen. If I remember that game correctly. Game 2 was interesting. I was up against a Kenrith player, a Winota player, and a Rocco player. So immediately I recognized that I am in a functionally blue light pod. Kenrith has blue stuff, but I wasn't convinced that they were on like a super control-y plan. I figured they were just kind of playing 5-color win the game stuff.
They never are. They're never playing control stuff.
They never are. So I was mostly on the, okay, we need to keep a just strong hand that just wins the game. And do so I did. However, not without almost dying to the Winota player, who functionally went unchecked for the first 4 turns of the game. They just did the Winota thing. And thankfully the Rocco player, so this was really good sequencing on my part. I had a Goblin Engineer, was the absolute star of my entire weekend. Every single time I saw that card, I felt like God. And it just was sick. Loved it all day. I was able to get out an early engineer and dump Cursed Mirror, so I just got to keep a clone effect in the graveyard, thinking, okay, I'm going to get something decent out of it. And the Winota player is doing their thing. They've built up a massive board. Thankfully, a combination of the Kenrith player had something to stop or kind of interrupt Winota a little bit, but it wasn't substantial. And I ripped a Bowmasters for my turn 1 draw. I'm like, okay, this is pretty good. I can start like dealing with enablers and setup and whatnot. Their only enabler was a Aven Mind Sensor. They went land, mana crypt, past the turn. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Going into their turn, they flash an Aven Mind Sensor. I'm like, okay, they're gonna be able to untap, swing with Winota, get a guy, get a trigger, but I can at least kill the enabler. If they're unloading Winota, that means they don't have more enablers to play. That means we can kind of slow the tempo of the game down just a little bit. They do exactly that. They flip into, I can't really remember what they flip into. I think it was Professional Facebreaker. Yeah, I think it was Facebreaker. And they're just starting to just get mana and start putting guys out, and the Bowmaster's able to clean up a little bit. And eventually we get to a game state where Winota's just online. They're just killing us all. They have Rick. I'm just going like, holy shit, guys, we are losing to this Rick. The Rocco player comes in big clutch. They have Skyclave Apparition. We're talking about everything, how to take care of this, and I'm like, okay, well, if I can get to my untap, my Goblin Engineer will be online, and I'll have an artifact I can sack. I can get the Curse Mirror out, and we can have another removal spell for the Winota player. So, if you're able to deal with, like, the Winota or something, I can deal with the Rick, or deal with the Rick, I'll deal with the Winota, whatever. We need to get these guys off the board. We have 2 removal spells, we need to use them. The entire time, if I remember the sequencing right, they flashed an Aven Mind Sensor, and I was able to Vamp Tutor for pod. I'm like, okay, this pod is just going to sit in my hand, and we're just going to find a window where we have a 3-drop and 6 mana, and we're just going to get there. No one's going to have any interaction for me because this table doesn't have interaction. We're just gonna find the line. We're just gonna get there. I actually felt pretty clever. I had a Gaia's Cradle and was tapping for a decent amount of mana, and I'm like, oh, I have this Endurance in hand. It's not really doing much. I want to grow my Cradle count. I'm just gonna flash out this Endurance for value. And everyone's like, oh, okay, sure, why not? And I untap. I look at the board. I'm like, oh shit, I have exactly enough to beat like anything at this point. And the Winota player is dealt with. Everyone's mostly tapped out. The Kenrith player tried to flash in a Oppo on me, and I had just enough mana for like a removal spell against it, and was able to just get there off pod. And that kind of has set a lot of the tempo for really how I feel about Baby Pod, where I either get stomped out by Thoracle in just the right time, or I'm able to just land my line and win and no one can interact with me, which don't really know how I fully feel about it. But anyway, moving into round 3, this was another quick one. It was just a very quick Thoracle run. No one had any interaction. This one felt a little bad. So we had a Warnog Sicily player, this is Malcolm Kettis, and then we had a TK player. We had Blue Farm, and the Blue Farm player ended up taking it. The Warnog Sicily player drew like 15 cards, And I'm just like, I'm just not going to do anything. You can deal with it. Apparently, all the cards they drew were awful. Just the biggest stinkers of cards. Because the TK player functionally tapped out, no cards in hand, just raw Thoracled and got there. And I'm like, you didn't have anything? The Warnock Slave player was like, nope, I had nothing. I'm like, that's fucking tragedy. Also, no, I'll say that for the conclusions. Going into game 4, I'm feeling kind of okay. I feel like I'm doing as well as I can, really only losing to Thoracle, and I feel like my game plan's pretty on there. A lot of people are denying me clues, which I agree with, but also I think there are a lot of points where people could have just freely taken the clues and just wanted to deny me the resource. I'm like, okay, not get the free draw, sure, whatever. I get it. Probably correct. Game 4, I am up against, oh god, what are my notes saying? We are up against I think it's Malcolm Tana, is what I wrote there. Kennen and Warnog and Bjorna, the baby blue, kids.
Yep.
And my hand is decent. What, 3 lands, well, I really cannot read my notes. I should notate better when it comes down to this. Anyway, the hand was decent. I knew this game was going to be a bit of a crazy one. The Kinnan player tries to get there early. They're stopped with a Force of Negation. My early win attempt off of a finale got counterspelled, and then the game kind of just ground for a while. The Kinnan player was able to land a Manglehorn, and no one was able to get anything done. Everyone was just kind of spinning their wheels trying to get there, not getting there. The poor Malcolm Tana player, I sniped their Spellseeker. They cast a Spellseeker. I'm like, yeah, ETB on the stack, Oppo, and they just like kind of just like not necessarily salt or tilt out, but they got and they just like tossed me their hand. I'm like, oh, I guess they didn't know that it's a May on the Spellseeker. Their hand was a gamble, and I was able to snipe a Mystical Tutor. I'm like, okay, this game's going long, and I feel like there's not enough removal out here, and I have 2 Rainbow lands. I'm getting Pact of Negation. I'm just going to hold a counter spell open the entire game. The game continues to grind and grind and grind. I have an S% and less drawing a couple cards every now and again, and I managed to find my way into a Pyro of Heroes. I'm like, oh, that's a pretty good card. It comes into play tapped with the Pyro Heroes, but like this gets a Grand Abolish or something else pretty crazy later on. And I kind of just steamroll the table. I'm the only one actually able to play and develop and stick things. I stick a Pyro of Heroes, hold open some stuff to do some things, and I just untap and pot away my Esper Sentinel into a Grand Abolisher and just proceed to win the game. I'm kind of glad I made the change to the deck that I did. I wasn't on... I took out Vivian because I cut the Rector package out of Pod a while ago, and when I was talking with you, you're like, why are you not on Vivian? And I was like, that's a good question. Why am I not on Vivian? It's just another copy of my win condition. I should just toss it in there. Came in clutch because I had no other way to win. The Dockside count was low. I didn't have a removal spell in hand, and Pod would have entered tapped, so I couldn't do the Pod lines. And I draw for turn a D-Tutor. I'm like, oh, that's a pretty good card. And I'm like, I don't know what this gets after a Grand Abolisher, but I get something. Certainly. I was thinking like a removal spell and trying to chain together some stuff. And as I'm thumbing through my cards, I'm like, oh, Vivian. Counted my mana. I'm like, yep, that's 7 mana. 1 more than I need. I'll just get this and win the game.
Ooh,
yeah. Vivian came in clutch. A really good card. I kicking myself for not playing it again earlier. And clutched out round 4. We're 2-2, 10 points. Very much locked for day 2. Pretty locked for top cut. And go into our last pod, and it was kind of a nightmare pod, if I'm being real. It was double Kenrith and... Or no, it was... double Kenrith and a Tivit? No, that's not it. Oh, I didn't notate this one because it was a fun game. It was... Tivit, Blue Farm, I think a Kinnan, and myself. I forget what our fourth pod composition was exactly. We ended up splitting, so it wasn't really that important. We ended up just like playing for fun, and it was a good game. We all kind of just went balls to the wall, just shove everything, and who the fuck cares? We're here, just kind of here to play cards and have fun. But that rounds up Swiss. Top Cut. It was crazy. I've been on a rampage.
You've been tearing it up.
It's been crazy. I'm not used to doing this well in tournaments, but I've just been going crazy. Before we go into round 2, what is your opinion on like just like what we're seeing just in our neck of the woods? Because I've got some weird conclusions to draw.
There is so much Kinnan.
There's
so much
Kinnan. There's so much Kinnan, and I am not seeing a lot of Adnaz. Like, even, like, the games I played, I didn't see Adnaz even remotely talked about, apart from people being like, I don't have Adnaz in my deck. But as I was wandering games, I saw very little Adnaz.
I can't speak to that. I got just ate it alive in game 1, like I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
I think Blue Farm still plays Nas, so every time I see a Blue Farm list, I'm like, oh, I know they were playing at Nas. Other than that, I really didn't play against that much Black in general. It was
I feel like yeah, I agree with you on that one.
Yeah, I played against just so much Kinnan. Like, there was a Kinnan in basically every pod I played almost. I think my pod 1, I was against 3 Nas lists, and then after that, it was just Kinnan. And then, like, the random Tivit list, or, like, the random Sisay list, or whatever. It happens to be the Fringe deck at the table, but...
Yeah, it's so fucking much... everywhere I went, I saw Kinnan, and just Kinnan, and more Kinnan. And I'm just like, what the fuck? There's so much of this fucking guy. Get him out of here. I don't want to see him anymore. I get it.
To say.
It's, yeah, those are the prominent decks, I would say. I saw a little bit of, like, Blue Farm, but honestly, I saw more variants of Blue Farm than I saw, like, Blue Farm itself. Like, I played Warnog. I played a Warnog mirror. I was not anticipating playing a Warnog mirror. I was one of, I think, 4 people in that tournament that was playing Stranger Things kids. I did not think I would be seeing those cards in the command zone at all the entire tournament. I was very, very surprised by that.
Yeah, that was a little strange too. I was very surprised by, because yeah, I knew you were going to be playing it. I knew one other person was going to be playing it, but there were, like you said, there were like 3 or 4 different people there with those with like different pairings of those commanders, and it was a little unusual. I think there was also like there's a fair number of like Fringe lists, but just a lot of blue in general. Like the PNW tends to be very blue heavy, but
yeah.
also like very creature blue heavy, like a lot of Simic style stuff where it's like they aren't casting a lot of blue spells other than counter magic. Like they're splashing blue for counter magic, but then a lot of their decks are just like green red or like all the other colors or whatever. Like there are very few lists, I would say, that are like aside from Blue Farm that are casting a lot of like spells.
Yeah, which is, and we also just don't see like any amount of stacks. Like we see, I guess you see Trinisphere, but like I don't really see much in terms of the stacks department outside of like Drannith Magistrate, maybe the Manglehorn, like the style of effects. I'm not really seeing like Archon of Emirias or like stacks creatures or like just like the usual like white contenders.
I ran into Drana and Linvala. I ran into Archon of Valor's Reach.
Holy shit!
Yeah, I ran into some stack stuff. Cursed Totem, Grafdigger's Cage, but like a lot of it was just like the meta stacks pieces, like Grafdigger's Cage and Cursed Totem. The things that Kennen plays, like Void Winnower and Manglehorn and things along those lines. But yeah, nothing like, there were no like stacks decks that I played, though I guess Winota does play those pieces. I didn't play against any Winota lists.
Yeah, I played against the Winota list, but they did not draw any of the stacks cards outside of Aven Mind Sensor, but even then it was kind of a non-issue. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's, I gotta imagine it's something to do with Bowmasters, like just kind of like, because you just start picking off all the stacks creatures and then stacks doesn't get to do its thing of just amass a lock on the board and just beat you out.
Bowmasters has done a number on Staxier style lists from what I have gathered, but yeah.
But yeah, so that was day one. Moving into day two, I got a bye for the quote unquote last round of Swiss, the placement round, whatever. How was your quarterfinals game?
It was actually really good. It was probably my favorite game that I played throughout the entire weekend. To be honest, there were a lot of highlights from other games, but I think this was just overall the most enjoyable. I got to play with our friend Jarrett, was in that same pod, and then got to play with a Rocco player named Kelly, who was just the coolest dude. Kelly, maybe you found us, maybe you're listening. I really loved that game. It was awesome. So it was there was a Tivit player in first seat, followed by Jarrett's playing Demir Malcolm, so Tavish and Malcolm, and then myself, and then the Rocco player in the fourth seat. It was fine. Tivit player, their whole game was play a land, pass, and then skip land drops for the next couple turns. No ramp, nothing. And then drew a couple fetch lands, but there was an oppo in play, and so they never cracked them. That was kind of rough. I'm not exactly sure what their opening hand was because they kept 7 cards. So I guess in theory it was really strong, but they didn't really do a lot because they were choked on mana the whole game. Jarrett had a pretty strong start with like an early Malcolm. They had an early Wishclaw Talisman that they used to tutor. I had an okay start with the Gemstone Caverns, turn 0 Vampiric Tutor for Command Tower, turn 2 Enlightened Tutor for Mana Crypt. That's wrong. I had turn 0 turn 0 Vampiric Tutor for Command Tower, and then I had a couple of counter spells in my hand to hold up. And then I was able to Eladamri's Call at the end step before my turn to pick up Italian. And then Jarrett had a turn 1 Wishclaw that they cracked on turn 2. I was able to politic them into giving me the talisman that I used to then go get a Mana Crypt. And then on my turn, and then in my upkeep, I was able to Enlighten Tutor for a Smothering Tithe. Then I held up some more counter magic. Turn got around again. Rocco was setting up still. I was able to play a land, play the Mana Crypt, cast my Talion. Draw some cards off of Rocco as they're doing their thing. They jammed a Treason Ogre, but they were a couple colored pips short of going for it that turn. Passed it around. Jarrett passed to me. I threw down a Smothering Tithe. I passed the turn with the Talion and the Tithe in play, and just started like picking up value incrementally. Rocco tried to send it. Jarrett had an oppo that they shoved into play, stopped the Rocco from tutoring, and then immediately after that, of course, was when Tivit started to draw their fetch lands. They were just putting them into play and not cracking them.
It's always a sad day when that happens.
Yeah, I'm starting to draw cards off of the Talion, as well as make a bunch of mana off the Tithe. I cast Kenrith, cast a Bloom Tender, so I'm starting to sort of just like creep into a very dominant position, sort of like subtly running away with the game, even though I'm not doing a lot. At the tipping point for the game, I think, was when I got to like 8 cards in hand at the end of my turn and discarded for hand size. One of those cards was a Grand Abolisher, and everyone started freaking out. Rocco started politicking to get the oppo to leave so that they could at least do anything or have the option to do something. Otherwise, they were just going to start trying to beat Jarrett to death. Eventually, the op blocks a Rocco to unlock them. My Smothering Tithe gets Besagied at some point. Tivit breaks open some fetch lands, finally draws a Mana Crypt, passes with a bunch of mana open. There's a Tevish Dot that lands at some point. We've had a Malcolm land at some point. We're just kind of keep grinding. Jarrett sticks an Archaic. Jarrett clones their Archaic and then clones my Talion.
Fucking Wandering Archaic, dude.
Yeah, the card's really good. But yeah, that was kind of like the pace of the game. It's just kind of like everyone doing, or at least me and Rocco and Jarrett doing everything. The Tivit player was just kind of stuck there doing not a lot. Tivit player finally tap out, cast Tivit, make a bunch of treasures. Jarrett's seen so many cards at this point. They've got like a Skull Clamp in play and all this stuff. but like I'm just beating them up with Italian triggers, and then I'm just hitting them for combat damage. They start talking about resolving a meat hook massacre. I'm telling them I'm gonna like just be cracking my ranger captain and countering that spell unless they put it on the stack for anything other than 0. Decide they have a different solution. This whole time everyone's freaking out about like dockside Fimmage loops, making sure the count's like at 7 or lower. And so they do. Jarrett's solution is to resolve a clone as a copy of Kenrith. The clone is imposter mech, so like they do the count. Count is 7. They resolve it. They gain some life. They pass the turn. I hit them. They tap out to flash in a blocker to save themselves from lethal. And then I go and clone. I've cloned the Archaic twice. So like the Archaics are neutral at this point. So counter spells from both sides are just kind of like gonna just
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. They just bounce off, right? And then I cast a dockside. And I made 8 treasures because the table miscounted because the Tivit player had buried their mana crypt inside the lands, and they had forgotten about it except for they had like set it, but like when they were doing the count every time, like each turn, somewhere or other it got lost and got missed.
Oh, they just missed it.
Yeah, like the Tivit player was even saying like I have one, but like people were like, I think like the game defining scenario was somebody counted 7, missed the mana crypt and counted the imposter mech, and then the resolved the imposter mech, counted again, counted the mana crypt, forgot the imposter mech, and counted 7 again, even though because they were like this is a copy of Kenrith and didn't count it as an artifact, passed the turn,
yeah.
and I was just able to go dockside for 8, image for 8, and then just make infinite mana and win the game because everyone was tapped out. So that was that game, and that got me into the semifinals.
Which semifinals game was a bit of a doozy because the two of us met in semifinals.
Yeah, that was the first. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it was a really, really solid game. I still think the hand I kept was so fucking funny. The like creature combo list. I keep 5 lands, one of which is a Boseiju, oh god, I can't read my card, I can't read my notes, a Mana Crypt, and I can't read my last note. All I know is I had a lot of mana and I drew a Goblin Engineer for turn 1, but my hand was just all mana. My thinking was, this game's gonna go long, it's me, you on Kenrith, a Tivit player, and another Kenrith list.
Playing my exact list. This
is a mirror match for you.
Yeah.
My thinking was, okay, the Tivit player is going to try and start something early. My job, don't do anything early. Develop instead. What do? See a lot of lands? We are making 5 mana at some point. The game is not ending soon. I can almost guarantee that. We will find our time.
Yeah, it was, my keep was also a little suspect. I was in 4th seat because I came up from quarters versus y'all who had actually made the lock for semis, and had gotten the bye. And seeing that it was Tivit, and I knew this list was a mirror, because they're somebody who we also play with in our group. And so Alex was playing a mirror, and then you, and then me, and I actually played with all 3 of you players before. Alan was the Tivit player, and so I'm relatively familiar with everyone's lists at this point. So like, in 4th seat, I had a little bit of a suspect keep on 2nd 7. It was 2 lands, a Deathrite Shaman, Dark Ritual, Opposition Agent, Esper Sentinel, and Intuition. And my thought process was with this hand was, I'm pretty sure based upon these lists that everything is going to go relatively slow unless you try and force something really, really early, which I was pretty sure that in 4th seat or in 3rd seat you weren't going to try to do because there were 2 blue players untapping ahead of you. So unless you just had like the nuts, right?
Yeah.
Or my thought was like Tivit was gonna go a little bit harder first. I was suspecting that Tivit was going to try and push for something, like through like push for a win either with a silence effect or with like multiple pieces of backup. But I was pretty sure in first seat Tivit was going to try and shove it first, whether it was Cedh or Thoracle. And I messed up. The reason that I kept this hand it was not Esper Sentinel. It was Stunt Double, and it was Stunt Double because Tivit was sitting across the table from me. I said, oh, I'll be able to either Stunt Double Tivit or I'll be able to Stunt Double one of your really advantageous creatures.
Yeah.
And so I went turn 1, land Mana Dork, and like pray that we don't die on 2, right? Like maybe the other Kenneth player, or maybe you have like something to stop somebody if they go for it. Maybe the Tivit player can, like, hoping that you 3 decks, since you're a little slower, will hold each other in check. Made it around on turn 2, so I was able to play a land and pass. That's when I drew the Esper Sentinel. I had my Sentinel drawn on turn 1, I think.
Yeah, the fucking Esper Sentinel was cracked. I reread my notes and kind of deciphered it. My last card in hand was a Mayhem Devil. So the plan was, well, I have lands plus a Mayhem Devil. The Tivit player is going to have a very hard time playing through the Mayhem Devil. That was correct.
That was very correct.
Very correct. Because my draw for turn was Goblin Engineer. I'm like, well, that's an insane card to see right now. So I go land. I had thankfully 1 fetch land in hand, and I go, this fetch land is going to be a source of damage. I don't need to fetch for it right now to color fix. I have all my colors. I can do what I need to. I can hold this up as just a pinger. We don't need to do anything. Land, Mana Crypt, Goblin Engineer, dump a Curse Mirror, and I just proceed to play the first few games incredibly passive. My hand is just we wait. I drew like a removal spell. I think I drew like a Final Fortune for turn 2. It was a very weird card to see when it was. I'm like, this card doesn't really do a lot, but I can, like, if I find a window and I can be opportunistic with it, like maybe we can make something happen here. But like, it was just a lot of, I'm just gonna slowly develop my pieces, keep this Goblin Engineer open, and we'll like clone a Tivit, we'll clone something like from your end or from the other Kenneth players' end, and we'll just hold that up. Yeah. Also, I should mention, my Mana Crypt had it fucking out for me.
Yeah, you took a lot of damage off that.
Holy shit. I took, I think,
probably like 18 points of damage, close to half your health.
Easily close to half of my health. It was over 15 for sure. I'm pretty sure I lost most of my Mana Crypt flips that game. I think I won maybe one. I won at least 1, possibly 2. It just had it out for me the entire game. It was a big moment.
I remember that you won a flip and you were all like, woo!
You popped off, and I'm like, it doesn't matter at this stage of the game, but we'll get there.
Yeah, so that was that. I didn't draw a land on my turn 1 or 2, so I was going to go into my turn 3 without a land drop, and that was pretty unacceptable because I was banking on being able to cast this Stunt Double 1 turn early so I could accelerate into whatever I needed. So my best play of the game was casting an Intuition for 3 mana sources. I cast Intuition and snagged a Mana Crypt, an Ancient Tomb, and a Command Tower. And fortunately, I was given the Command Tower because, once again, it didn't deal me damage and it fixed my pips even better than they already were. So that was really good for me. Meant that I would be able to cast my Stunt Double on 3, and that was really like all I wanted from that hand. That was my game plan.
Yeah, I saw the Intuition come down, and you were immediately like, this is getting rainbow lands, or like just lands, like non-Boseiju lands. I'm like, that's somehow still scary that we are just gonna let this resolve. Like, it's not that like you were gonna like snake us or whatever. I knew you were gonna do what you said you were gonna do, but it also meant like you were guaranteed the land drop, and if you wanted to guarantee the land drop, that means you have something worth playing that you need the land for.
Yeah, it was one of those things where it's like just deploying it, like just letting the table know, like before I even put it on the stack, I was just making sure that everyone was okay with it. Like, all right, guys, my plan is to just make sure I can play this game. I'm in 4th seat. I need to be able to do something here. Right now, I'm just trying to make sure that I'm keeping pace with everyone who's ahead of me. So I'm going to be playing this Intuition and getting lands. Is everyone okay with that? And make sure that everyone's like, yeah, this won't get opt. We'll let it resolve. Like, no big deal.
No need to waste the removal spells for functionally a cultivate.
Yes, exactly. It was Instant Speed Cultivate is basically what it was. Except not even quite as good. It was for 1 land. But yeah. But everyone was like, yeah, this is fun. Like, as long as that's what you're getting, we're okay with it. So I put it into play, got exactly what I said I was going to get. And then I was given the Command Tower. I played the Command Tower for turn and passed. and put my Drago control plan online. Tivit played their Tivit and passed the turn, and then at the end of your turn, I think you played the Mayhem Devil even that turn, but I was able to...
think so, yeah,
I
because I
think
was
so.
able to play it before you wanted to stunt double.
Yeah, but I did stunt double the Tivit, even so. Made a couple treasures, made a couple clues, went to my turn, then I
Yeah.
went to attacks, slapped the other Tivit, who had been taking some damage off their fetches, shocks, and mana crypt. Or no, ancient tomb. It wasn't a mana crypt or shocks. It was just they kept tapping their ancient tomb. So I hit them, knocked their life total down, and then passed the turn. After trying to cast an Eldritch Evolution for 3, which was supposed to get a Spell Seeker, so I could get another counter spell to just sort of like push the game out even further like additional Drago control, right? And like that's when the Tivit player I think made their biggest mistake is
They just snap fierced.
Yeah, there was like it wasn't even like they'd ever like talked to me about it or like asked what it was gonna get or anything. Which like as I said before, like we've played before, so they know that like if I'm open to those types of communications and like talking about what I'm gonna get and negotiating, and they kind of just snap fierced it before they even ask, and that like set off a bunch of alarms.
Yeah, because so a couple of decision points. Also, we haven't talked about the other Kenrith player. Unfortunately, their hand was just not great.
It was not. It was like a couple lands in a mana crypt, and then they missed a lot of land drops.
They unfortunately just didn't have a lot. They didn't even have a lot of interaction. It was just not a good keep from them. I will say one of the decision points, and I think I probably should have done this now that I've thought about it more. I had a Touch the Spirit Realm to end the mana to pay through the ward on Tivit. Or no, it wasn't Touch the Spirit Realm. It was Swords, because I just drew removal spell, and Final Fortune was basically all I drew for the entire game. I really strongly debated killing the Tivit when the clone came down, because I knew it was either going to get that or it was going to get a Mayhem Devil. I was more fine with the Mayhem Devil, but I knew giving you a 6/6 advantage piece in the air was going to be the death of us. I think it was incorrect for me to just let you get the Tivit. But I figured, if you're focused on dealing with the Tivit player, I can always just kill your Tivit later on once they're no longer a threat. Just not even thinking about the advantage you were going to accrue off the Tivit alone, or like the tempo or anything.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's I think because the Tivit player was also considering touching out their own Tivit in response to the clone, and like just basically no one removed the Tivit in response to my clone. Which kind of ended up setting the pace for the rest of the game, is because I was able to just sort of like attack for 6 damage in the air every turn, and unlike Tivit, who's like has to worry about like keeping their Tivit alive, so they can't really block with it, because it's their combo piece. I don't care. This is a clone. If it dies, it dies. If it gets exiled, it gets exiled. I'm just able to score free damage and mana acceleration as well as draw power off these clues and treasures. The card has done its job after I've paid 4 for it and gotten an ETB trigger effectively. So in that regard, my Tivit is actually like a lot better than theirs, because it doesn't have that value. Even though it can't come back, it doesn't have that value attached to it, where if it leaves, I'm losing a combo piece that's really expensive to develop. And that sort of came back to bite them, because there were certain times where during the game where I was able to attack into them with their Tivit untapped, and they just couldn't block because they didn't have the resources to take a turn off to recast Tivit at 8. And certain times where they wanted to attack me and pressure my life total,
They just
couldn't, because I had a Tivit up, and I will easily trade my Tivit for their Tivit
100%.
for that exact reason.
Yeah, but so going on to that Eldritch play, you say Eldritch Evolution, and I think you get like partway through saying, they just snap fierce. I think at that point I say, yeah, that's a lethal push if I've ever seen that before. I just immediately go, that's a game-winning counter spell right here is what we're trying to do.
Yeah, it was, and I think like it kind of, like I said earlier, set off alarm bells for all 3 of us, you, me, and the other Kenrith player. We all go, oh, that's not good. And of course, me having not really anything else to do, I pass the turn, and immediately in their upkeep, that Tivit player cracks their Ranger Captain.
Meanwhile, you have a Fimaged Mayhem Devil. I have a Mayhem Devil.
Yeah, we have Mayhem Devils on board, so they crack their Captain, and we're like, all right, Mayhem Devil triggers, shoot you in the face. And then and they're like, okay, and they start getting ready to do their thing, and I'm like, hang on a second, guys. and then I start counting sacrifice triggers that we can get, and realize that between the two Deathrite Shamans in play and all the sacrifices between my treasures and your Goblin and Engineer and all these things, like we can just kill them, and basically that recognition forces them out of their turn without making any push to try and win the game, because they'll just die. They have to try and bide their time for a more opportune opening where there's not lethal damage on board.
Yeah, I think at one point I say, yeah, as soon as you do anything that we think is going to cause you to win the game, like, we're just going to kill you at instant speed. So, like, take the L, you cracked your Ranger Captain, you're not going to get any value from it, pass the turn, find your next window. You're not going to be able to get it now.
Yep, and that's exactly what ended up happening. So the other Kenrith player, they sacrificed their Deathrite Shaman to their Neo form, turned it into a Dauntless Dismantler to try and slow down any like Time Sieve combos, Dockside combos from either of us, any of that type of shenanigan, and then passed to you. I don't think you. Once again, you didn't really do a lot. You just kind of like.
I think I developed like a Warnog or something.
Yeah, more clues or something like that.
Yeah.
Pass the turn. I keep swinging with Pivot. I think I find the time and the mana to bring down a Kenrith, maybe, and then just kind of pass again, and the rotation goes around some more, and then eventually, I think it's on your turn, the Tivit player thinks they see an opening, and they cast Silence. I try and I pitch cast a Force of Will, like losing my Neo form to it to try and stop it. They dispel, and over the top of all that, I think I just go, all right, guys, this is becoming like too much of an issue. Let's just kill them before they can blow us out again. And we figured out a way to score enough damage to get them to the point where they're at like, I don't think we could quite kill them, but we could get them to like 2 life, and they couldn't crack any of their treasures, which is where all their mana was tied up in, because of Mayhem Devils. So they ended up just being like, yeah, I recognize the game is over for me, and they just like cracked all their treasures, and then we just kind of like gentlemen's like shot every trigger that we had at their face to.
Yeah, I think we cracked them all the way down to 2, and then they just cracked their remaining treasures and just get me out of here.
Yeah, like I cannot win this game anymore, so there's no point in me sticking around. Which, like, I get that. I'm not sure that I would have made that same play. I typically believe in always playing to your outs. But they said, I don't want to play this game anymore since I don't think there's any possible way I can win through these Mayhem Devils. And they knocked themselves out of the game.
Yeah, which, to be fair, they were also just never winning anyway, because their win line was Word of Invention, finding Time Sieve, and I had just been clutching the Seiju the entire game.
Yeah, which I didn't even know at that point. I had honestly, I'd assumed that their win condition was Born Upon an Wind Thoracle Consult, because it's a lot safer under a Silence in that situation. I would have, because Time Sieve is going to deal 10 damage per activation to them, because they have to sacrifice 5 treasures, 5 permanents every time. There's no possible way they can outrace 2 Mayhem Devils on the field.
Yeah, and I'm still so baffled by that decision, because me and you are pretty much in lockstep with our Mayhem Devils. Like, they occasionally pointed towards our faces, but for the most part, were just squarely pointed at the Tivit player, because they kept trying, essentially.
Yeah,
It just kept pulling aggro.
Yeah, they just kept taking, like, they were very far ahead as far as their mana and development, and so me and Fourth Seat, my whole thought process this time has just been like, I need to make sure that the 2 fastest decks at the table don't win. I need to make sure that Tivit can't, like, Thoracle me, because I don't have an out to that right now. I need to make sure that you can't get some sort of, like weird pod line off that I'm not equipped to deal with at this point in time.
Or just accrue enough creature advantage that I'm just unstoppable.
Yeah, I felt actually like relatively okay playing against the other Kenrith player, just because like I having built the list, I know like what the strength positions of the deck are and what the weaknesses tend to be, and so like I was evaluating their position as relatively stable, like not bad, but not great, and they were never able to, unless their hand was just the nuts, I never put them in a position where they would just like be able to win the game, like kind of home free. At least not through Mayhem Devils, right? And turned out that assessment was correct. At one point, they popped their Dauntless Dismantle. They had tutored 4 for 0 in order to force a bunch of treasure cracks and everything from the Tivit player when we're like trying to stop them from winning the game. Is either take out all their mana so they can't do anything under the Silence, or force them to crack everything and they die, right? Which is a really good play. But it also popped their mana crypt, taking them from like 6 mana to 4, and so they were
But
kind of
just put
stuck
them
there.
out.
They're stuck there for a long time. At one point, they did finally top deck a land. It was a fetch land. They played it, and I was sitting on this opposition agent from literally the opening hand because I had kept it.
For
that
me,
much
I
control
feel
just
so
stop you.
proud. I mean, like, it's a good play. Keep turn one opposition agent against the deck that tutors a million times. Like, I
Yeah,
get it.
like pod lists. Yeah, I'm keeping an op agent turn 1, turn 2 against anything that sans blue, right? Like anything that's trying to use
100%.
pod or like a Rocco deck or anything like that. I'm
Yeah.
just not keeping that hand as long as it does anything close to else. And so I opt their fetch land, see their hand, which was actually a really strong hand. They were just waiting for the right dockside count and their window, and they would have been able to present the win with protection. Unfortunately, their protection was a pact of negation.
Ugh.
So without the 5th land or mana source already in play, they were not able to cast a counterspell that game. And so, especially when it being DEs, you can't really like. There's no such thing really as like, I'm gonna do this to like force a draw or whatever, because
There's no draw
knocking
to be
yourself
had at this
out.
point.
Yeah, and so seeing that, I knew I was pretty safe. So I sent my Tibet all the way at you. Was able
Yep.
to knock you out with combat damage.
Yeah, I was at like 6 or 7 life at one point. I had swords and solitude, and I incorrectly I greedily chose to use without another pitch card. It was exactly 2 white cards, and I was like, I'm gonna be greedy. I want to hold this solitude. I don't have the mana to cast both, so I tried to cast swords on. I think
the Tibet. It was the Tibet, if I recall. And then
Yeah, I think it was the
I
Tibet.
said ward trigger. You paid your 3 mana, and I had top decked the One Ring at some point during this game.
God,
so
the One Ring just fucking kept
it
you
was
alive.
it was the top deck of the gods. It drew me like 5 or 6 cards throughout the game. Whatever, like, so I guess it'd be 1 and then 3 and then
I think it was 6 cards it drew.
yeah. So it drew me 6 cards that game. Which once again, 4 mana for 6 cards, not a bad rate. I drew the 3 cards in response, and they just happened to be one of them just happened to be mental misstep. So I misstepped the swords.
God, I'm just like, please, other Kenrith player, do you have anything for this? I'm like, nah, man,
yeah,
I got
they didn't.
nothing.
They had the pact that they couldn't cast or they died. So I stopped your swords, had lethal on you, and then the other Kenrith player graciously knew that their game was over as well because they were at sub 20 life and had nothing, not a hope and a prayer of executing a combo in the face of the One Ring, Tivit, and Kenrith on field.
Yeah,
and so they graciously conceded.
Yeah, as soon as you cast the Kenrith, in my brain I'm like, okay, I think I out loud said like, okay, we can all acknowledge that you turned the corner, right? You have a 6/6 and a 5/5. Like, this game is going long. These are problems. Like, we're going to die by the hands of these, and I was correct.
You were. Those cards are liabilities.
Yeah, and so ended my tournament run at the Cascade Clash.
But it was a very good run.
It was a solid run. I think I'd bring Baby Pod again to this event if I ran it back. I think I would have played a little bit tighter, maybe kept a bit more of an anti-Thoracle hand, or maybe teched a bit more against Thoracle, because that was literally, apart from you killing me with combat damage, which, I mean, honestly, the Mana Crypt is really what lost me that game at the end of the day. It's just losing nearly half my life to the card. It's just awful.
Yeah, when you're playing at 20 life against a 6/6, it gets a lot harder.
Yeah, it's very rough at that point. But I think I'm gonna shelve Baby Pod again for a while. I hated the play patterns of it, where either I lose because I don't have the right interaction for what happens on the table, which, to be fair, sans blue, I don't have the greatest form of interaction, but my interaction that I do have, and I do run a lot of, very, very effective when it is. The power of that deck is anytime I saw Solitude, I stopped the win attempt, or I got rid of something critical, and no one can answer it. It's such a good card.
Creatures are just so hard to counter.
They're so good, and having a Swords to Plowshares stapled onto a free creature that I can just reanimate or get with my creature tutors, insane. The pod lines felt very, very good. Come back to 1-card win conditions, access from the command zone, in multiples, different flavors. Sublime, superb. The part I hated was it really felt like the deck lived or died behind its silence effects, and there was very little interplay apart from that specific play pattern. I either had to amass so much advantage that I couldn't be stopped anyway at that point, play any other deck, or
I resolved the Grand Abolisher, and if you resolve the Grand Abolisher and have anything to do, you win the game. So it's kind of boring, repetitive play patterns. So I'm just going back to Hellcat at this point.
Yeah. I personally, I get that. I do not like boring, repetitive play patterns, so I am in full support of your decision to go back to playing Oblivion.
Yeah. I kept having the feeling like I won the game, sure, but like it wasn't stimulating. And I think back to all the games I played on Hellcat. I'm like, every game felt like fun. Like I walked away having a good time. Like I'm gonna keep doing that. That was fun. All right, finals.
Yeah. What a crawlback from day one. Honestly,
Can we just talk about that? You were like second to last, maybe last out of Swiss for day one, and you fought tooth and nail to get there.
Yeah, I don't know, dude. I just had that mental reset. I took that night and I didn't even sleep well, and I said, I just said, you know what? We made it to day 2. At least we did that. That was more than at least half the field did not make it to day 2. A little more than half the field, I think. I'll take that. That means that I get to play one more game of Magic, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go play one more game of Magic. And that's kind of just like the way that I looked at it for the rest of day 2 is like, I'm going to play one more game of Magic. And then I won that game. I was like, sweet, I get to play one more game of Magic. And then I was able to win that game, and I said, this is awesome. I get to play one more game of Magic. And so that was kind of my mentality fix for the rest of the day was I like playing Magic, and I think I was putting a lot more pressure on myself in day 1, like to perform. And we've talked about it before, right? It's like sometimes you feel anxiety or like pressured to do well, especially if you've done well in the past. And I think I was doing that to myself a lot. And in day 2, I said, you know what? There's no need to think like that. I'm gonna have fun playing a game that I enjoy, and that's exactly what I did. So then we won all those games, and we got to play a third game of Magic. And the third game was really interesting. It was Blue's Clues or Baby Blue Farm, whatever you want to call it. It was the 2 Stranger Things kids in Blue Farm colors, actual Blue Farm, me, and then Ob Nixilis to my left.
Wild run for that guy.
He was the only person ranked lower than me out of Swiss, and he also crawled his way up there. So honestly, good for him.
As a Rakdos enjoyer, it did my heart well to see Rakdos at the finals.
Yeah, he's his name's Alex. He's from Spokane. Very cool dude.
Yeah,
really
super chill dude.
Really enjoyed playing with him. He's super awesome. He was on a little bit different Ob build than I'd seen in the past. He wasn't on Adnaz. He was on like a more mid-rangey build. Very intriguing. The kind of like the defining card of that entire top 4 game that he played was Wandering Archaic once again.
Holy shit! What I watched this entire game. That card fucking carried.
Yeah, you were there. You were my dude watching the whole game. Support from the back line, and he played that card, and it just warped the entire course of the game. It was something else. But basically, my third seat, my keep for top 4 was actually, I think it was first 7? No, it was second 7. But it was Gemstone Caverns, one more land, maybe 2. As I recall the rest of the hand here, I'll know in a sec. But it was Gemstone Caverns, Abrupt Decay, Endurance, Mental Misstep, Stunt Double, and 2 more lands. That's what it was. It was a 3-land keep. So it was a 3-land keep, Mental Misstep, Abrupt Decay, Endurance, and Stunt Double. So I had a fair amount of interaction, as well as something to do if an impactful creature hit the board, which, I'm going to be honest, there was going to be at least one within the first 2 to 3 turns, because Tymna, Crom, and Ob were all at that table. So
there's going to be something good out there.
I was cloning a draw engine one way or another. My pitch card and one of the other people from our area actually talked to me a little bit about this play post-game and said that they really, really liked it. So when I played my Gemstone Caverns, I pitched the Mental Misstep after we'd literally been talking, like in the pregame chatter, you gab before a game. The whole all of the chit-chat before the game was like, oh, this pod's going to be really fast. We need like counter spells to like stop you guys. I'm going to make sure that I keep a super control heavy hand. And then I pitched Mental Misstep to my Gemstone Caverns, which drew a little bit of a
Not the pitch I was thinking personally, but after you talked about it, I'm like, well, that makes
yeah.
sense.
It was my and my opponents immediately went, "You're throwing away a misstep? What the heck?" And the play that me and our friend Orlando were talking about after the game was this bluff that I made, which may or may not have actually had any impact on the game. But I was like, yeah, I don't need this counterspell. This is the worst counterspell in my deck. Which doesn't say that I have a counterspell in my hand, which would have been a lie, and I'm not going to do that. But it definitely it implies that I probably have something else to cast with this Gemstone Caverns on turn 0.
Yeah, that was the worst card you wanted to pitch for an extra mana in your hand.
Yes. I had actually wanted to pitch Abrupt Decay, and I almost did, but I realized before I designated my card that if I did that, I wouldn't have a green card pitched to have a turn 0 endurance if I needed that to blow out a crazy early Thoracle or a really early breach that somebody cracks an LED on but doesn't actually have anything to follow it up with before they escape a spell or whatnot. If it's okay, turn 1 fast mana breach gamble, and if I can then endurance in response to that or something, I can blow out a breach attempt, or if someone just tries to turn 1 or 2 Thoracle, I need that green card in order to stop that attempt, whereas Mental Misstep is only going to stop an early fish or an early consult, maybe a tutor or a soul ring or something like that. Nothing that's going to actually be game altering if I trade this 1 for 1. So I decided to pitch the misstep and bluff interaction instead. I of course, first seat goes Mystic Remora, which the farm player and I immediately say, nobody feed this. The odd player says that they really kind of want to, because that's what their hand is fast mana. But if we don't feed it, they also will hold off feeding it for as long as possible. So Timna Crom goes land pass. I go to my turn, top deck a Mana Dork and play my land. For turn, cast the Mana Dork, leaving up an Underground Sea, still bluffing the counterspell. And the seat 1 baby blue player missteps my Dork, which I then I said, this is not worth wasting a counterspell over, especially when it trades you a card. Continuing to maintain my bluff, and then let the misstep resolve and pass, hoping to just draw my 4th mana source over the next 3 turns, since I'm anticipating we'll get there since no one's going to feed this fish. Ob plays an Ancient Tomb and passes, doesn't feed the fish. They pay for fish. Timna exiles a guide and casts a Timna. I play another land, draw a land for turn, and pass. Ob says, guys, I didn't draw another land. I'll hold off 1 more turn, but next turn I have to feed the fish at least a little bit in order to be able to play the game, which is fair.
That's a very reasonable thing to expect.
They're saying, I'm doing what I can to keep this person off fish, because they had bragged before the game started about how fish had won them all of their games that they had won, is people just feeding the fish. And so we're trying to starve it as much as possible. They play a land for turn, or they Dark Ritual to keep the fish alive, play a land for turn, and pass. Or maybe they do it next turn. At any rate, there's an Ancient Tomb that gets played to keep the fish alive, and they use a Dark Rit at some point to keep the fish alive, but their fish still only draws them 3 cards ever.
It's such a mana sink, and just slow the game down.
It's starved. Yeah, and the more they pay for this fish and the more we don't feed it, the better my position gets because of the stunt double, and I'm just hitting my land drops. Timna gets a swing, plays a land. I think they maybe cast a Crom, or maybe that's next turn. I hit my 4th land drop and pass. Ob vomits 2 or 3 rocks onto the field. I think they vomit 2 rocks on the field, feeding the fish, but they have to play the game. But they make up for it by throwing down this Wandering Archaic. So now nobody can just add Nos for free, because if they do, Ob Nixilis gets to copy it, or any other spell they get to copy. And so the turn passes, the fish dies, the baby blue player casts a Tainted Pact looking for anything to do. They hit a breach, but don't have the correct mana or number of cards or something to go off. But the Archaic, that the Ob player also gets to copy it, and at this point I've already stunt doubled the Archaic, so I also get to copy it. I go 3 cards steep, hit Displacer Kitten, want to keep going, decide I can't exile Displacer Kitten for this game, so I stop there and put it in my hand. The TK player plays a Dockside, makes 6 treasures. Oh, that's what it was. They play Dockside, make 6 treasures, cast their Crom, pass. I touch the Spirit Realm, my stunt double, trying to leave their second main phase, everyone flips their lid, says, except the odd player. Everyone flips their lid. So it's the farm players. The farm players flip their lids.
Of course they do. They always do.
We're losing. Okay, whatever. Your
My
farm
count is
players,
4, my guy. Calm down.
Your farm players, you've all had draw engines. You were actually the ones in a lead here. Anyways, the TK player still has treasures. My stunt double comes in as a copy of their dockside at end step, which makes me 6 treasures. It can be 8 if Timna Crom doesn't crack their treasures, which they decide it's not worth it after just throwing this fit about how we need to keep me off mana. So I make 8 treasures instead of 6. Goes to my turn. I immediately play Italian and Displacer Kitten. And then pass the turn with 4 mana up because I cracked all my treasures because I wasn't about to feed this dockside count any further. I pass. Ob had Tainted Pacted for their dockside extortionist. They cast it. Everyone freaks out about how this is going to win them the game. I don't disagree, but there's nothing I can really do other than cast a Worldly Tutor in response to flicker my stunt double and make some more mana. But I'm not going to tell my opponents that. I have this Talion in play on 1. Timna Crom casts a Mystical Tutor, triggering the Archaic, not being able to pay for it. I don't want Ob tutoring, so I cast a Worldly Tutor, flicker my dockside copy, make a bunch of mana, resolve that, put Op on top, draw the Op off my Talion trigger, Op the Timna Crom's Mystical Tutor, and the Ob player opts not to copy it because they don't want me stealing a card from their library as well.
Smart.
I take Tainted Pact out of the TK player's library, cast it, flicker dockside, start looking for an answer, exile all the way down to Force of Will, which is basically every single win condition left in my library except for like 2, one of which is Phantasmal Image. So it's super conditional on having a dockside and treasures not being crackable. But I've exiled my dockside, so if anyone else's dockside doesn't have a dockside in play, I can't win that way. Force of Will the odd player's dockside after I cycled 3 Tainted Pacts. I hit mine, I cast mine, I made some more mana, I kept going, I found Force, I cast Force, I forced their dockside. The odd player casts a Disciple of the Vault and passes the turn. The baby blue player has Breach from their Tainted Pact, realizes they can't go for it because there are just so many advantage engines and resources floating around, they're gonna get blown out. Me sitting on Endurance, I'm very confident they can't win here. And I've still drawn even 2 or 3 more cards off Talion. Not that it was any interaction, but it was Baby Rift and maybe one other removal spell.
There's a couple things to do, nothing really crazy.
It was nothing crazy, but it was okay. The baby farm player passes. TK casts a Flesh Duplicate, and we're all oh, it's gonna be a dockside, and they're why would I make a dockside here? My count's only 6 or something, and there's
only
a
6
Disciple in play. We're okay, we're not countering it either way, so what are you gonna do? And they're okay, dockside trigger. I was fair enough, we knew that was what it was gonna be, but whatever. Mm-hmm. So they dockside trigger. We start just pinging them with this Disciple of the Vault, just triggering Ob Nixilis, so Ob can start to dig for answers as well. Every spell they keep casting is triggering my Talion because they're casting a bunch of 1 costs. They do slam an Underworld Breach and try and win. The baby blue player, honestly, they're kind of the reason we didn't lose, even though I'm the reason we didn't lose. I forgot I had this Abrupt Decay in my hand, because they're going for a Brain Freeze line, which the Endurance doesn't really interact with very, favorably at all. But they're can anyone do anything? And I was no, there's nothing I can do, but let me check my hand. I've drawn some cards off Talion, and I see this Abrupt Decay, and I say, wait a minute, there is something I can do. So we put an Abrupt Decay on the stack, the Archaic is cloning it, and we spend the next... And I this is not an exaggeration when I tell you the head judge was standing there watching us and timing us the whole time. We spend the next hour and a half resolving the stack that starts with Abrupt Decay
singular stack.
Yes, one singular stack that starts with Abrupt Decay targeting Underworld Breach. Because there's a Mind Break trap trying to exile the 2 Abrupt Decays. We counter the trap several times. They counter our counters on the trap several times to keep escaping things, to keep trying to dig out their answers. Storm gets crazy high. We take them sub 10 life because of my Talion and the Disciple of the Vault. Eventually we starve them on mana, starve them on cards in their graveyards. The Decays resolve. We're able to stop the breach. Phew.
There is so much more that happened in this deck. At some point, the Obnix player was able to cast like a Dark Red into a Tainted Pact to find their own Reb to counter something. I forget what it was
It was
exactly.
like a D-SWAT or something that they swatted. Like
Yeah.
they Tainted Pacted for D-SWAT.
For D-SWAT Reb. Yeah.
Mind Break Trap.
Yeah, that was it.
Oh my god, yeah, there was... Honestly, I just cannot capture how intricate that stack was.
I'm watching the entire thing happen. I'm like, what the? I'm kind of following what's happening, and at some point, like, this stack is taking forever to resolve. I'm going to the bathroom. The bathroom's like a 3-minute walk away. I go do my business. I walk back. I'm like, this stack has not changed in the slightest. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on? The all players like going crazy. They're trying to do what they can. You're doing what they can. The baby blue players just kind of like just chilling kind of the entire time.
They're just sandbagging a bunch of interaction, but we never actually pushed priority to them for fear of like getting blown out, because once again, you just don't really want to push priority to 4th seed if you can really kind of avoid it. So there we were. So we finally resolved the stack, abrupticade the breach, and they go to end their turn. Meanwhile, I had been drawing a bunch of cards off of this Talion because everyone's throwing around their like 1 mana interaction and like their 1 mana creatures and stuff. Well, during this stuff unfolding, I had drawn Phantasmal Image, I had drawn Chord of Calling, and I'd drawn Eldritch Evolution, and I'd drawn something else. So my position's pretty good because I can still... There are 2 Docksides on the field now that I can try and Phantasmal Image loop on. So we get to the end step. Everyone's mana has fizzled, and I cast a Chord of Calling for... Actually, no. I think I tried to move to my turn, and that's when the Ob player said, well, I do have this Slaughter Pact in my hand that I had drawn off the Ob, or I guess in exile, but I drawn off the Ob.
Triggered off the Ob, yeah.
And so they tried to Slaughter Pact my Displacer Kitten, which I respond to by Courting, and then they try and Deadly Rollick my Kitten, which I respond to by Flickering the Kitten, again using a Vampiric Tutor, and then a bunch more counter magic unfolds, like countering all my spells. But basically everything resolves with, I don't resolve a spell because of interaction, but what does happen is they cannot copy any of my tutors from the Archaic to go find more stuff to interact with me, because I still have this Op Agent in play from 2 turns ago. And so I don't have to worry about paying Archaic tax in that regard. And I was able to use my Baby Rift to bounce the Archaic before going into my turn. And I was able to use all of my Displacer Kitten flickers to keep itself alive and on the battlefield so it doesn't tax my mana at all. So I then get into my turn, make my land drop and stuff, and open up by snapping this Ob Nixilis, which is like 50 power and just locked and loaded, ready to kill me. Plus they also have their All Will Be One in exile already.
If you weren't doing something there, the Ob was 100% when you had to clear the Ob.
Yeah, I would have just died. But there was just a combat damage before they even comboed off. But there was a brief moment though where I did consider like I was able to recur my Cyclonic Rift. Even though my Eternal Witness was exiled, I could have like enduranced it back in and then tutored it up using a Spellseeker. So there was a brief moment where I considered trying to overload a Cyclonic Rift and then jam a Drannith Magistrate to lock out the Ob cards and just try and make it back to my next turn and just kind of like slowly kill everyone with combat damage. Realized that probably wasn't a super sustainable plan, and with the Docksides in play, I just need to inflate the Dockside count to 8 or more in order to get this Phantasmal Image to work. Well, that's kind of rough because they were very mindful about making sure that count only ever reached 7 before going into my turn. They decided to... I cast a Silence and they countered it with another piece of interaction. They tried to counter one other thing that I did. Eventually I was able to tutor up Grand Abolisher and cast it. They cracked all their crackables in response, so my count is still only 7. But I was able to generate about like 10 mana or so off just flickering this Stunt Double as a copy of Dockside Extortionist. And then
there's random triggers throughout the entire stack where you're just able to just divert some of those triggers, just random make treasure stuff.
Yeah, just to like ramp myself up. And then from there, I was able to cast Kenrith and use his ability. So you remember that force ability I cast like 5 turns ago when everyone flipped their lid at the odd player for casting Dockside Extortionist?
Yep.
Well, I sure did, but nobody else remembered it. But I used Kenrith's 5 ability to reanimate that Dockside Extortionist. Little known fact, because people just assume that Kenrith Reanimate was only ever used on your stuff and it wins you the game. Kenrith's number 5 ability reanimates the creature under its owner's control. So I reanimated the Dockside Extortionist. The odd player picked it up and went to hand it to me, and I said, "Oh no, that's yours." Kenrith puts it into play under its owner's control, so you actually get a Dockside trigger. I will refuse to crack any of my treasures, and Grand Abolisher also prevents people from cracking their crackables. So that their reanimated Dockside made about 17 treasures for the Ob Nixilis player, to which I refused to crack anything. Which meant they generated all those treasures, and then I was able to cast my Phantasmal Image, make in the neighborhood of 30 treasures, and that loop definitely wins the game. So I was able
very much so wins
yeah,
the game.
so I was able to assemble mana off of that, and then use that loop to deck the table with a classic Kenrith kill.
Which I didn't see that line. I was trying to chart the line. I'm like, I don't really know what you're going for here. And then I saw the Grand Abolisher go down. Because the entire time I'm watching, you're able to maintain. You get to do one of my favorite Kitten Spellseeker interactions, which is like, as long as you have mana and you have an instant you can cast, your stuff is untargetable functionally. Because you get to flicker the Spellseeker, get a thing, flicker the other thing, flicker the Spellseeker, just keep going. You ended everything with with a Cloud Shift in hand and mana to be able to cast the Cloud Shift. I'm like, yep, I think that seals the deal, but I just don't know what you go for, because I didn't see the Eternal Witness get exiled. I'm like, I think Eternal Witness is still alive. At the very least, I saw the Fimage in hand. I'm like, well, if you can engineer a way to like get treasures on the battle, or like artifacts on the battlefield, or if the game goes a little bit longer and people develop a little bit more, maybe that gets there. I didn't see the Grand Abolisher lock everybody out, reanimate the Dockside line. I thought that was tight as hell.
Thank you. Yeah, I felt a little clever for thinking of that. It's not often that scenario comes up, but that was kind of like my only out at that point. So I was really happy that I was able to remember that Dockside had gotten countered and to have enough mana and the forethought to reanimate it to inflate my own count. It felt pretty good, and it made the win very satisfying.
Well, congratulations, my dude. If anyone was deserving of win, people give you shit because you win every tournament, but also like you were so targeted and so down bad out of Swiss, and you just climbed, you just fought. Like I don't think anyone could be mad about your essentially reverse sweep of the entire tournament. It's fucking incredible performance.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was I had a grand old time being able to play that event with y'all.
Oh yeah, it's always a good time. It's always a good time.
And I was happy we finally got to meet in a round, because we like never get to play together in tournaments.
Yeah, no, we're always on we're always on opposite ends of the bracket. I'm always down the schlumps. You're always up getting all the glory.
This time it was flipped right up until the end, though. So.
Yeah, right. Which is so crazy to me. I love that. I think it's so funny that like the fates reversed and then you ended up knocking me out. But hey, that's kind of what happens out in these streets. All right. Well, I think we have thoroughly covered this wonderful tournament. Was there anything else that you missed or want to talk about or anything?
So. It was a great event. It was really well run. I do want to give one last shout out to Aegis Games, and Nick Hammond was their head judge. I really liked the event. I thought it was all put together very seamlessly, and I wanted to say thank you one more time for a great tournament.
All right. With that, everybody, I want to thank you all for listening. Atlas, I want to thank you for a fantastic game that we had in our finals, fantastic time we had, and coming on for this podcast as always, my friend. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you.